Welcome back to the Chasing Common Ground podcast. And I'll have to fill Dean in because since the last time he was on the show, it was still called The Lifestyle Chase. And I've since rebranded it to Chasing Common Ground because I have a tendency to interview people not only from the fitness industry, but also from outside of the fitness industry. And then B, because some people were thinking that my name was Chase, but my name is Chris. And so this just makes it way more straightforward. But Dean, welcome back. It's so great to have you back on the show.
Thanks, man. Always great to be able to catch up with you.
And for the listeners, Dean has been on the podcast for the first time. He was on February 5th, 2019, which was super special to me because that was actually how I celebrated my birthday that year, because my birthday is February 5th. And he made time for me. I got to see the Basement of Champions. And then the next visit was August 2021 during all the turmoil of gym closures and whatnot. And it was good to catch up. But now, all these years later, here we are, 2025, back to catch up once again. So, Dean, I'd love if you'd fill in the audience as to what's happened in the time since that.
Well, obviously, the world changes a little bit when the giant pandemic runs through. So, had a little bit of a pivot in business. So, focused more on in-person training because that was where people wanted the attention. Online coaching, I kind of scaled back slightly to make time for in-person coaching. In travel for workshops, I scaled that back and did more just virtual events as well as webinars, and then did a couple of more digital-based products. But on top of that, I also worked in a company that was developing an AI personal trainer. They built out software, they put out hardware, they did all that kind of stuff. I have no financial backing to the company. I just worked as a grunt for it to help teach the algorithm. On top of that, I wrote a book, and that's coming out next month. So that's always exciting.
And so I was thinking about the book leading up to this because I think sometimes people miss the mark as to like where the book fits into their career. And I'm always a big fan of education. I nerd out on podcasts, I go to events, I go to conferences, stuff like that. But I'd love for you to expand more into how the book could be a catalyst for people within either their fitness journey, within their career, etc.
So a book can be a couple of different things. It could be an ego project, just to be able to say, hey, I'm a published author, here it is. It could be an accomplishment where you're able to say, I finally have something to show that all of the hard work has led to somewhere. It could be a marketing tool to be able to say, hey, I've got these abilities behind me because I have published author. Here's a free gift of the book that I've written. It could be something that generates business down the road. It could be something that lends authority to you. I know there's a lot of keynote speaking concepts and professionals out there who, as soon as they were able to say they had published a book, they started getting offers, finding an agent, getting more of that kind of stuff. So, in many ways, the book itself for me was just kind of like a big life goal that I shot for. I've read since I was able to read like 5, 6 years old. There was one summer I tried to read every book in the library, and then I almost did, which is kind of cool. When I tried to get into medical school, I bombed out hard on the physical sciences, but I got in the top 5% internationally on the writing sample. So I think the universe was trying to tell me, hey, maybe you should write and not think about like medicine. And that kind of led to the development of the blog, development of a writing style, development of writing for other publications or websites, writing for myself more than anything else, just as like a creative outlet. And then eventually that led to people reaching out to me and saying, hey, we see your blog, we see you write, we see you've done all these other things. Here's a book proposal we want you to pitch. So the book for me was more about just like a culmination of interests that led towards a life goal.
Well, and I think that there's important context that I'll add in here that a lot of people may not have banked the amount of body of work within the industry that you have before leading up to the book. Like a lot of people who have known you for a long time, I'll use Andrew Coates as an example because I love giving him a shout out. Andrew Coates has experienced your work for years, and he's a huge fan, and it's because of your impact on his career. And so for you to step into this arena of having a book provides more value than the average book we may find in our space. And so that's kind of what excites me about it. But let's dig into like the context of the subject matter itself. Like how did you construct it? What's your ideal goal for the end user as they go through your book, etc.?
So my co-author and I, Dan Pope, we were reached out to from Human Kinetics and said, hey, we have this idea of a book that would help people figure out what to do with their own injuries and stay in the game, be able to still train, be able to get the most out of their training program. And if things pop up, how do they manage it on their own? Living in Northern Alberta, there's a lot of communities around us that may, if somebody's lifting and being active in whatever commercial gym they're at, they might still have to drive 2 or 3 hours to go to a physiotherapist who would be able to know what they're doing. So for those individuals, they have to be fairly self-reliant. If you have somebody who, let's say they're in the armed forces and they're stationed somewhere where they may not have easy access to medical, they still want to train, they still want to get after their PT, but it's something that might not be something where, oh, my shoulder hurts, what do I do about that? People do want to be self-sufficient and they need the tools to be able to be self-sufficient to a certain extent with the stuff that's most impactful, being able to offload onto medical professionals. So if somebody just wakes up one morning, they're like, oh, my shoulder hurts, but I can still move it, I can still warm it up, I can still do stuff. Do I need to go see a doctor, or can I just adjust my training around it? This book was designed to be able to help the layperson understand what those aches and pains mean, when they need to tag out for medical help, what they can do about it themselves, and how to adjust a training program effectively to take into account what it might be without knowing exactly what it is, and then giving people the power to be able to say, this hurts, but maybe this doesn't. So I'll do more of that instead because it doesn't hurt, it doesn't feel like it's a problem, and it's something where I can actually get a training benefit. So my co-author, Dan Pope, he's a doctor of physical therapy out of Boston. So when it came to writing up all of the injury-based stuff, he was the one who was able to tag in on that. And he's a great communicator when it comes to making complex concepts about injury mechanisms and about recovery really easy to understand. We didn't want to make this book so dumbed down that it wouldn't apply to people. We wanted to educate people and teach them, what does this actually mean? What is this actually about? But at the same time, we wanted to make it broad enough that people wouldn't think it's like medical advice or like, oh, this book told me that I don't need to worry about this, but now I have crippling nerve pain down my arm. So we wanted to kind of thread the needle between those extremes. And it's a tough battle to be able to do, but I think we were able to do a pretty good job with it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the value of something that is underrated in the sense that, like, not only can a person without a coach or trainer utilize this book, but someone who is working with people who wants to provide the best possible service ever
Mm-hmm.
could provide this as gifts to their clients. Like my philosophy on training is and I'm not perfect by any means, so people don't need to take my advice, but I like to teach my people as much as they want to learn. And I'm not scared of referring people to other people who are an expert in a certain space if they want to dive deeper down the rabbit hole, even if that meant that they might not spend as much time or money with me. I know that they get the best possible outcome. And I find that my lame jokes tend to keep the retention high. And so as long as I'm still funny, they don't stray too far away.
Yeah.
But is there any like specific case studies that you kind of run through in the book or examples of people that you think could really, really benefit from the book itself?
Well, we don't really give a lot of specific case studies just because we didn't want it to become like, here is one situation and that's the dominant one or anything like that. But we give broad overarching concepts and make it something that this works for the majority of people. So it's likely going to work for you as well. The biggest consideration that we wanted to take away from it is just helping people to understand what is the stuff they're feeling. Is it a sore tendon? Is it a nerve? Is it just a muscle that needs a day to chill? Is it you're overworking it? Is it that you did something new and your body just went into a little bit of a shitstorm cycle where it's able to say, okay, that was new. We just need a day or two to figure out what just happened. Like if I go and I work out in the gym 5 days a week, I get really good at that stress. If on the sixth day I decide to go hiking, that's a new stress that my body hasn't experienced for a long time. That new stress is going to make me sore to a greater extent than if I was just in the gym training. So to understand what that soreness means, if you want to have less soreness from new activities, you have to kind of train into those things. We wanted people to understand what that meant and how to do it and how to do it appropriately while giving them guidelines to be able to make it. So with a lot of the programming that we put together in the book, it follows basic progressions. It follows basic outlines, but there's also ladders. So if you can't do a front squat, here's a goblet squat. You can't do a goblet squat, here's the dumbbell squat with the dumbbells by your side. If you can't do that, here's a box squat. So there's ladders to be able to help people find out what their best capabilities are, but also guidelines for how to regulate your programming, how to auto regulate it and change things up. If you feel like 4 days a week is too much for you, here's how to adjust your program. If you feel like the intensity of the programming is too much, here's how to adjust it in a realistic way. So instead of just being general case studies where you could see what one person does, we made it really specific guidelines that we would give to all of our clients and patients, but also that any reader reading this would be able to be like, okay, I have an idea of what to do for myself.
I love that. And I mean, it got me thinking about something with regards to people trying to progress their career. Like sometimes they'll be providing support to their client and they're trying to explain that phenomenon that you described with the hiking and all of a sudden feeling different sensations and stuff. Or perhaps they're explaining different terminology. And your book could essentially act as like a universal glossary to kind of give people baseline knowledge of certain things that may come up in their program so that coach client relationship could be more based on like very like tactile feedback, maybe short form responses, or maybe just being able to relationship build and not so much have to explain like the science behind it all, and just gives people that much more independence where they can maintain this new lifestyle long term. So that just that really spoke to me because there's been many times when I've tried to kind of explain things in my own words to clients, and it may take up some time. It might take 45 minutes of chatting away. And if I just recommended the book, then it would be easy peasy. That said, in the journey of putting this book together, was there ever any times where you kind of felt any kind of self consciousness or anything, or hesitation to carry out that whole task?
Always. You're never going to escape imposter syndrome, especially if you're putting together something that you feel is full of your heart and soul, and especially something where you're putting it out into a broad marketplace where you know it's going to get criticized. That's just going to happen. And part of it comes down to saying, okay, well, can I please everyone all the time? No, that's just not going to happen. So I have to think more about who is this book intended for and what are they going to think about. If I'm worried about the strength and conditioning coach who works with the pro teams looking at this book and saying, this doesn't apply to my athletes, we use an entirely different system, I can't make that person happy unless I apply it to their system, which is just not going to happen because they're not my target audience. I'm not targeting D1 athletes. I'm targeting the average person in the gym who wants to work out and is probably feeling a little bit of soreness in their knees, their back, or their shoulders. I want to figure out what the heck do I do about this without going and getting a full body MRI. So I'm always going to be self conscious about whatever I put out into the universe. The challenge is okay, focus back on who I'm trying to help and what that benefit is supposed to be. You cannot please everyone all the time. All you can do is please some people most of the time and all people some of the time. But even then, you're
Yeah.
probably not going to please all people some of the time. You're going to tick off somebody all the time because some people are just angry. I can't help that.
Oh, it's absolutely true. Like, I think that's the biggest lesson I've been learning in my career. Like, I think I'm like 7 or 8 years into this thing. And I've learned that, like, even if I'm trying to be really nice to people, that almost agitates people more. But what I will say is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this book launch for you is, Dean, you've always been like super, super kind and genuine to like just everybody you cross paths with. And I just wanted to give a testimonial to that character that you have. And I've gotten to mic you up at a few of the Evolve conferences, and you're always one of the kindest speakers to me. So if anybody needed that little bit of a boost to support, that's it right there. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about in this episode is if there's other coaches listening and they have this tendency to compare themselves with other coaches, what advice might you have for them to kind of stay the course and kind of focus on their progression of this year versus last year?
So it's natural to try to compare ourselves, but it's also unnatural to change who we are based on that comparison because we're the only ones who live our lives. We're the only ones who see what our clients go through on a daily basis. We're the only ones that can actually go home at the end of the day and say, did I do a good job? So your goal isn't never to be actually perfect. Your goal is just to move and nudge closer towards better. As a
Hmm.
trainer, like our goal is to impact our clients' lives every single day. We get to see them on the best days of their lives. I've got a lot of clients who are physicians who see a lot of their patients on the worst day of their lives. So when they come into the gym, that's their break. That's their time to be like, you know what, I don't have to stress about this. With a lot of them, we talk about literally everything except their work, because their work is more of a drag than they would want it to be. But I get to joke with them. I get to have fun with them. I get to be the light on their day. And that's an amazing thing. Does it need to be perfect? No, it just needs to be effective. If we consider personal training to be a service based industry, so think like hospitality or like going out to a restaurant or something like that. We need to provide people with a great experience, with a really good service that meets their goals and leaves them feeling like they want to come back the next day. If we can do that, we've done our job. The exact details within that framework are so broad based on who's in front of you that it doesn't need to be perfect, and it can't be perfect. You just have to read the situation and do the best you can with it and make that client leave with either a smile on their face or a skip in their step, or if it was leg day, maybe a wheelchair to help get them back out to the parking lot, but wanting to come back for the next session. If you
I
can do
love that.
that, you're a success.
So this next question is drawing on both your life experience, career experience, and academia. There's some young coaches in my world, and by young I just mean like 4 to 5 years younger than me, and they are navigating that unclear path as to whether to lean more into growing their business, whether to lean more into pursuing further studies, academia, master's degree, etc., or uh, basically protecting time to spend time with their family and stuff like that. And it's always like it's not straightforward. It's very hard to discern. So I'd love to hear your take and your point of view on that topic.
So that's a really good question. Part of the reason why I did a bachelor's degree and didn't pursue a master's or PhD is because for what I wanted to do, I didn't see a specific benefit that I would get from either a master's or PhD. Now, would it be nice to have those letters after my name? Sure. But if I wanted to work with people in the gym, would it give me a greater opportunity to give my clients better service, better value for what they're doing, increase my costing? Maybe a little bit, but not to an extent where I'd be like, yes, that is justified. Now, if I wanted to get that master's degree, what would that do? What doors would that open up for me? Well, I'd be able to work more in a lab-based setting, which would be really cool. But again, for what I want to do, that's not what it is. I'd be able to have more letters after my name, which looks really good as a publisher. So potentially, but I have a book deal right now with a book coming out. Does that absolutely need to happen? No. I have a couple of friends, like namely Nick Tuminello, who's published dozens of books and doesn't have even an undergrad degree in a related topic, but he's been incredibly successful. What do you need to do the stuff that you want to do? That's the big question I would ask for people. If you want to be a better trainer on the gym floor, a master's degree is not going to do that. If you want to become a better marketer and build out an online training business, a master's degree is not going to do that. So, what does that master's degree open the door for you to do? And what does that do for your life going forward? If
Hmm.
you want to teach, if you want to be involved in research, if you want to be involved in lab work, 100% get that master's degree because that is the requirement to do those kind of things. But if that's not what you're interested in, why are you doing it? That would be like me taking a physiotherapy program and being stuck working in a clinic when I want to be on a gym floor. It wouldn't actually benefit me in any way to do that. That being said, if I wanted to do that, 100% go for the requirements because that's necessary. So a lot of the time when it comes down to academia, it's not necessarily a matter of more is better. It's what's appropriate, what's useful, and what actually makes you excited to get up and go to school every day for the next couple of years and build up another 10, 20, $30,000 in debt. That may be something that pays off at the end of the day or it doesn't. Is the cost worth the value?
Yeah, I love that. And that's a great way for people to kind of decide for themselves. Now, in the scenario where maybe they decide they want to do something new, different than what they did before, they may be hesitant to leap. Can you think of a time in your career when you've been hesitant to do something that you actually followed through with and what you did to kind of like take that leap?
I'll get to that part, but I wanted to share a story of one of my clients who wanted to go into a program because he wanted to get this different type of certification and go for a different job. So he wanted to go into a specific program. I won't say which just to protect his name. But at the same time, one of my other clients was in that specific field and in that profession that he was thinking he wanted to get into. So I said, well, why don't you two meet up, have lunch together, discuss what has actually evolved, and then what would that person in that field look for to be able to get work in that field. It might be something entirely different than what you're thinking right now, but you won't know unless you actually connect with it. So, for any of the people out there listening, if you want to do something specific, find people doing that thing and ask them questions. It might be a short email for 5 minutes. So it's like, hey, if you were hiring somebody, what would you need to see to be able to hire that person? What would you want to see? And what would be the bare minimums? If they come back at you, they're like A, B, C, but you were thinking X, Y, Z, that's going to give you a bit more clarity to be able to say, oh, well, I was either off the mark or I knew what was actually going on. In terms of clarity to my own thing, a lot of the time it just comes down to me saying, let me give this a try and see if this works. I failed on a lot of different things. Like I used to run a podcast. I think I got about 13 episodes into it, and I thought, you know what, this just isn't me. This just isn't what I'm interested in, not what I want to do. And it was costing me more money than I was willing to spend on it. Because to do something like this, you have to actually make an investment. So kudos to you, Chris, for making the investment and seeing it through. But at the same time, a lot of my biggest successes have come just from trying something and seeing what happens. With any of my digital products, the first thing I did was just say, put it out there. Let's see what happens. Some of them have sold incredibly well. Some of them sold next to terribly. And it's just a matter of saying, well, it's there now. What do I do with it? Do I need to do anything different? Do I need to do something in a way that helps people see something differently with any of my writing? Some articles go viral. Some articles just sit in the dustbin. So you don't know unless you actually try. So be willing to take a risk. Be willing to challenge yourself. At the end of the day, you're probably not going to be worse off than you are now, but you'll have some really cool experiences that you can learn from to be able to say, okay, do I want to do that going forward? Or would something else spark my passion?
I love that. Like the reason why that piece resonates with me is I've turned into quite a nerd over the years. I'm kind of behind the scenes of like 4 or 5 fitness industry podcasts, so I kind of feel like that evil guy from Avengers where he could just snap his fingers and like half the industry's podcast disappear. But I will never do that.
Yeah.
But as a result, I've developed like unique expertise where I've been developing a course for people in the fitness industry on starting their podcast. And I've already developed a course for people on how to use like low barrier to entry video editing tools, but in ways that are more effective and stand out more. And I've just been kind of like chicken to kind of put it out there more boldly. So you've inspired me with that. And then I have another follow up question with regards to conferences, because I'm a
Mhm.
big advocate of not only going to conferences myself, but being that obnoxious guy that encourages as many people to go to conferences as well. And I know conferences have been a very integral part to your career in some way, shape, or form. So I'd love to kind of dig into that. Like, what was your first industry conference like, for example?
The first conference I did, I think, was the CanFit Pro National Conference in Toronto back in 2005. So that kind of dates how old I am. Um, Part of the challenge with that was obviously being a fairly new trainer, not having a lot of money, but seeing the opportunity to be able to learn a lot and be able to take what I learned and expand into other venues. Um, Half of the benefit was actually attending the conference to learn from the sessions. The other half, which I would actually say was a bigger half, was a lot of the sidebar conversations, meeting people, connecting with people in the industry, which led to things down the road. So it's not something where you're going to just go and learn directly from the conferences themselves or from a virtual event. Virtual is fine if you're really restricted or you don't have the ability to travel. But seriously, go to live events because you get so much more out of the in between sessions, out of the social events, out of the mixers, but also seeing people do stuff live in person is so drastically different than seeing something on a TV screen. You just get so much more out of it. I think the 2007 was where I had the first contact with a publisher who down the road we were able to finally connect on something, and I was doing a side project, just a small thing, which eventually led to building up a bit of a portfolio and eventually led to a book down the road. So it's not something where you're probably going to be like, oh, I got $50,000 worth of business out of going to this one conference today. It's something that down the road you can develop processes that work really well.
I like that. And I mean, for me, my experience has been like conferences probably like saved my career, whether it has been through like the morale boost from having more friends, which is always nice, or
Mm-hmm.
whether it's been like the connections and the opportunities that have come from those connections, and even just mentorship and whatnot. But
Yep.
I'd be curious to know like who have been some people who you wouldn't have connected with if not for conferences, and how do they make up a big part of your world today?
It's a long list. I mean, Eric Cressy was one of the first connections I had when I went to an NSEA conference down in Las Vegas, I think in 2010. And we just happened to bump into each other at a sandwich shop. And I was like, oh, hey, I saw your presentation earlier. You do really good work. I'm going to start following you. And then eventually I reached out to him and did some things with him on the side. And then we started to connect a little bit more in affiliate marketing, and then connected a little bit more where I taught a workshop with Tony Gentilcore at his space. So that was kind of one of the big ones. Outside of that, people seeing me present at conferences led to business opportunities as well. And a lot of that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gone to a conference, seen what it was, and said, I could do that. I want to try, apply, teach continuing ed within the company that I worked with in the past, build up an ability to do public speaking, and then eventually go into different things that way. So Eric Crusty was probably one of the first ones that I was able to meet. Jeff Hallavy has been a great source and great connection to have in New York City. He attended one of my seminars once when I was at, I think, the NSEA as well. Meeting Gray Cook was a great opportunity too. He was able to sit in and watch my presentation one time where I was kind of tearing apart the FMS, and he's like, "Wow, you did really well. That was awesome. I've never heard of you. What are you all about?" And we were able to chat for a little bit about it. So that's kind of cool to be able to have somebody like that pump your tires up a little bit.
Oh,
Um,
totally.
Absolutely. And like outside of that, it's just been a great opportunity to see people whose books I've read. Stu McGill is another opportunity, but we were able to connect on a couple of different things. So like it's great to be able to have people that I look up to who I consider friends.
And I would have to say that, like, when people make these connections with industry people, it helps to normalize that we're all just like normal people. Like,
Yeah.
there's so much like contrasting points of view. Like, what I've seen that I really admire, I can't remember his name, but I'll just describe the scenario. So there's this dude on Instagram with a huge audience, and he can have some polarizing views, or he'll put out some memes and they go viral, but he's actually made a point to meet up in person with some of the people who he may have in fact disagreed with, to be able to just spend some time with them in person, to give them the opportunity to explain their methods, for him to explain his point of like maybe the meme that he created. And in most cases it creates like a catalyst more than it creates more division. And I think that that can help people a lot mentally and emotionally. So like, even if somebody went to a conference, to cross paths with somebody that they may have disagreed with in the past, even if it results in like a respectful difference of opinion, I think it can make longevity in this career much better. But then also sometimes it results like, there's people who have disagreed with each other and then ended up collaborating because they realized that like they could work really well together, or their philosophies combined can create a lot of traction or help more people.
Yeah.
That said, next topic I'm going to pop you into is, for the general population, if you were to improve the health markers of people in a way that was the most accessible possible, what would your approach be if it was just through the context of delivering messaging through a podcast?
What do you mean by health markers?
Let's say you have a room full of people and most of them have higher blood pressure than necessary, and they all talk about sore knees, sore back, and low energy.
So I would probably approach being able to make it something where they can actually increase their physical activity in a realistic way, which is going to help their sore joints, which is going to help their blood pressure, which is going to help a lot of the comorbidities around it. What does increasing activity actually look like? Do you need to exercise in the gym? Can you do body weight stuff? Can you just walk more? Can you do other different things to be able to increase that physical activity? Most people could tolerate more activity in their daily lives. And when I say most people, I mean the people who obviously aren't doing Ironman competitions, or like training for high rocks or CrossFit or something like that. Even those individuals could probably increase a little bit of physical activity in one way or another. But for the most part, those aren't the people that I'm concerned about or talking about. If I have the average office worker, yeah, how do we increase your physical activity? If I have the average person who is a caretaker, how do we increase your physical activity, knowing that you might not be able to dip out and go to a gym 4 or 5 nights a week? Those are the people that I want to meet, and those are the people that I think need the health benefits of exercise and more physical activity more than the general population who are already going to a gym and already taking care of their fitness.
Hmm. And I mean that it's important that we kind of reiterate how many people could benefit from just being more generally active, because sometimes people are almost concerned that being more active could exacerbate some of the symptoms they're having from inactivity. And
Hmm.
if we lean a bit heavier on, like, take your 10-minute walk and turn it into a 20-minute walk, do that consistently every day, and then maybe increase it to a half hour walk daily. Just like it doesn't even have to be extreme scenarios, etc. But I'm hoping that as time goes on, we find better ways to position physical activity to the people who stand to benefit from it the most, and don't get so lost in the weeds of like the minutia of how to do a tricep extension.
Yeah.
Um, one of the other things that I was going to ask is, are you someone who sets like yearly or 5-year goals for yourself? Is that kind of something that you operate under?
Not really. And I understand why people do that, but for me, it just doesn't seem to be something that I go for. If I have something big, I'll definitely set out and be like, okay, this is the goal that's going to take this long. So that then becomes my goal. So, like when writing this book, I knew that we signed the agreement in December of 2022. I knew it was going to be at least 18 months to get that on the shelves, and it wound up being more like 24 months, 26 months. So that's fine. That's a 2 year goal that I can work towards. For building up an online business, that might be a 5 year goal to be able to say, okay, I want to go from this many clients up to this many clients. But most of the time, when I approach any kind of goal, I just give myself what's the timeline of that goal and go for that, rather than being like 5 years from now, I want my career to be here. Just because I don't know, looking back 5 years ago from now, I was hoping to be able to get out of the house. I was hoping to be able to, go back into the gym and be able to train people in person again. 5 years before that, I was in a commercial gym, not knowing whether I would still be there 2 years after or not. 5 years before that, I was building out my blog. So who knows where the world is going to take you? So having long term goals is great, but they also have to be something where it's like you kind of go with the wind. You adjust course as you need to.
I like that. When it comes to creating time for yourself to kind of like fill your cup, do you have any like guidelines or like North Stars for like when is it time to go to the mountains or anything like that?
Whenever it's cheapest.
Yeah, I
I,
like
I
that.
mean, going to the mountains is expensive these days, man. It's getting ridiculous. So if I can find a room rate somewhere and we can figure out dog sitters or house sitters for the dogs, and we can both be available, we're going to go when we can. But it's nothing where it's like, okay, every year I require 4 weeks of vacation time to be able to. It's not realistic for me. It's just whenever we have the ability to, and whenever I have the funds for it. But ideally, more is better for recharging the battery, but it's not always realistic to make that happen. This year, I know that we're going to be going on a couple of trips just because we've got them booked already. I would like to get to the mountains an additional time, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Mhm. And I mean, if anybody listening relates to me, as I spend a lot of time by myself just working a whole bunch, one thing that I've learned to do is to create little wins within my year for myself. So one tradition that I started is because when I first started in the fitness industry, that's why like our podcast together on my birthday was cool, because that's like literally my celebration. I'm doing a podcast with Dean Somerset, and that was like my birthday party. And then since then, I would notice like all of my colleagues that I had become friends with were always busy during that time. So I would create something around my special day to acknowledge something for myself to give me a bit of a recharge. And so when I turned 30, I went to Jasper with my parents. When I turned 31, I think I didn't go to Jasper. But then when I turned 32, I went to Jasper again, but I got a cabin. And I was like, man, this is awesome. This is the best. And it was an investment, but it helped to recharge me for the duration of the year. And so I've turned that into a tradition for myself. And I found it to be transformational because a lot of people just like work, 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 work. And they think like they'll get there eventually. They'll get there eventually. But we never actually get to that end goal. We keep moving the goalposts.
Mhm.
So even if a person's like celebration changes, like there's been times I just walk through IKEA and get an ice cream cone, that's my celebration. Even if there's constraints with like economic stuff, or geographical stuff, I think it's important to always make time to kind of celebrate. But with that said, to keep us on track, I am curious, what are the ways that people can invest in the book that we hyped up so well in the first 10 minutes of this episode?
I like that you said invest because that makes it sound like it's just going to give you back at the end of the day, which I'm hoping it does. The book's available for pre-sale now through anywhere that sells books: Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Indigo, Chapters. I know there's going to be a lot of independent bookstores that are probably going to have a copy or two. Um, Go on and just click or do a search for a book called Rock Solid Resilience, and it should pop up with my name as well as Dan Pope. It's available for pre-sale now. It goes on sale February 28th, and I know this is a book that a lot of people are going to get a lot of value out.
Absolutely. And I'll pop in enough links to keep people busy for a few minutes just so that they don't have any excuses of not being able to find it. And then lastly, I'm just going to ask you one final question because this has been such a good episode. Final question is, if you're giving people advice today on Thursday, January 30th, on how to make their week just a little bit brighter, just a little bit more just fulfilling, what advice would that be?
I think what you were saying earlier about find the wins is really impactful that a lot of people seem to forget. So they don't have to be big wins. They could just be something that went well for you. We're so easy to find all the negatives that we need to fix and all the stuff that's not going well that we need to change. But if we can figure out a way to focus on the wins that we get in a week, even if they're tiny ones, that's a great way to go. One of my clients, I always tell her that she always does the compliment sandwich to herself, where she'll find a negative about a good and then follow it up with a negative. So instead of it being good, negative, good, she does the exact opposite. So this week she did something kind of that blew my mind where she said, I'm getting better at this, and just left it at that. So she did something where she didn't do the negative compliment sandwich. She just went straight for a good thing about what she's been doing. Didn't preface it, didn't put it into context, didn't reduce it down, didn't turn it into a negative. And that was massive for her because she's been able to make that psychological change to be able to be like, okay, I can celebrate a win and not feel like I'm arrogant, conceited, cocky, any of that kind of stuff by not demeaning my accomplishment back down to something. Just by being able to say, I'm getting better at this is great. That's fantastic. So if you lifted a little more weight, if you made it to the gym as many times as you wanted to this week, if you were able to get to work without having all the red lights that you normally would, if you were able to get through the week cooking your own meals and not getting skip the dishes or Uber Eats all the time, if you were able to see progress in something that you've been working on a regular basis, if you made all your bill payments this month, if you were able to get out of bed when the alarm hit and didn't have to hit snooze 7 times, those are all wins. Celebrate them. That doesn't mean that you have to take the rest of the week off work, but it just means that you celebrate the small wins that come up. I did good here, and just leave it at that.
I think that's amazing. And I think sometimes people overlook the compound effect of having the right mindset, a positive mindset. So I'm hoping people take that advice literally and start looking for the wins. But with
Yep.
that said, we'll probably have another one of these down the road. But I just wanted to thank you, Dean, so much for coming back on the show.
My absolute pleasure, man. It's been great to watch your career expand since I first got to know you, too. So keep doing all the good stuff that you're doing. You're making the industry better than when you got here.
Thank you.